You may have been praying about a particular situation, wondering whether you should stay or leave, questioning whether you are on the right path, or simply asking God for some kind of reassurance. And then suddenly, something happens that captures your attention. You hear a particular message from someone. You open a Bible passage and find words that seem connected to exactly what you have been experiencing. You encounter the same theme repeatedly throughout the day. Someone unexpectedly tells you something that answers a question you had been carrying silently in your heart, and you begin to wonder, could this mean something? If you are a person of faith, you may even wonder whether God is trying to get your attention through an angelic messenger. In Christian tradition, Archangel Gabriel is especially associated with communication, revelation, announcements, and messages connected with God's purposes. Gabriel appears in Scripture at extraordinary moments, including when Daniel needed understanding and when Mary received the announcement concerning the birth of Jesus. So today, we are going to explore 9 signs that spiritually minded people sometimes associate with Gabriel's communication. But there is something important you should remember before we begin. Not every coincidence is a supernatural sign, and not every unusual experience should immediately be interpreted as an angelic message. The purpose of this message is not to make you obsessed with signs, but to encourage you to become more prayerful, discerning, attentive, and spiritually aware. The first sign is that you begin encountering the same message again and again in unexpected places. You may be thinking about courage when you suddenly hear someone talking about courage. You may be asking God whether you should start again, and then you repeatedly encounter messages about new beginnings. You may be struggling with forgiveness, and somehow the subject keeps appearing in conversations, books, sermons, videos, or scripture. At first, you might think it is simply coincidence, and perhaps sometimes it is. Human beings naturally notice patterns, especially when something is emotionally important to us. But even when there is an ordinary explanation for what you are noticing, you can still use that experience as an invitation to reflect. Instead of immediately saying, "This must be Gabriel," ask yourself, "Why is this message affecting me so deeply?" Perhaps the message is exposing something you have been avoiding. Perhaps it is reminding you of something you already knew, but were afraid to act upon. Perhaps you have been praying for direction, and what you really need is not a spectacular supernatural event, but the willingness to pay attention to the wisdom already being placed in front of you. Spiritual maturity means learning to distinguish between curiosity and genuine guidance. You do not need to chase every coincidence. You simply need to become quiet enough to recognize what repeatedly draws you toward truth, wisdom, courage, love, and responsible action. The second sign is a growing desire to communicate something that you have been keeping inside. Gabriel's biblical role is deeply connected with delivering important messages, and because of that, communication becomes one of the strongest themes associated with him. Perhaps there is something you have needed to say for a long time, but have been afraid to say it. Maybe you need to apologize to someone. Maybe you need to tell someone that you love them. Maybe you need to establish a boundary. Maybe you have an idea that you have been afraid to share because you are worried about being criticized. Or perhaps the message you need to communicate is not to another person at all. Perhaps you need to finally admit something to yourself. Sometimes we spend years running from a truth that we already know. We tell ourselves that we need more time, more evidence, more certainty, more permission, when deep down we understand exactly what needs to change. If you begin experiencing a strong desire to speak honestly, do not immediately assume that every impulse is divine instruction. Instead, examine the fruit of the message. Does speaking bring greater truth and peace? Does it require kindness? Does it respect other people's freedom? Does it encourage responsibility rather than revenge? There is a tremendous difference between speaking because you are angry and speaking because you are ready to tell the truth with wisdom. If you believe God is guiding you to communicate something important, then allow that guidance to make your words more thoughtful, not more reckless. The third sign is sudden clarity after a long season of confusion. There are decisions that can occupy your mind for weeks, months, or even years. You think about them when you wake up. You think about them while working. You think about them before you sleep. You ask friends for advice. You imagine different futures, and you constantly wonder whether you are making the right choice. Then, sometimes without warning, something becomes clear. The circumstances may not have changed dramatically, but your understanding has. You suddenly recognize what you have been tolerating, what you have been avoiding, or what you genuinely want. This kind of clarity can feel almost like a light turning on inside your mind. Spiritually, someone might describe this as receiving guidance or revelation. But clarity does not always arrive as a supernatural voice or dramatic vision. Sometimes it arrives after months of prayer, reflection, experience, and emotional growth. Sometimes God answers a prayer by changing your perspective rather than changing your circumstances. You may have been asking God to remove the storm when what you actually needed was the wisdom to navigate through it. You may have been asking for a sign about the entire future when what you really needed was enough clarity to take the next step. If you experience this kind of clarity, do not rush. Write down what you understand, pray about it, consider the consequences, seek wise counsel when necessary. True guidance does not become weaker because you examine it carefully. The fourth sign is you repeatedly encounter reminders to be courageous. This can happen during seasons when fear has become the dominant voice in your mind. You may know that you need to change something, but you are afraid of what people will think. You may know that a particular chapter is ending, but you are frightened of what comes next. You may have a dream that matters deeply to you, but every time you consider pursuing it, another voice tells you that you are not capable. Then suddenly, messages about courage begin appearing everywhere. A sermon speaks about courage. A verse catches your attention. A friend tells you not to give up. You hear a story about someone who started again after failure. You read something that reminds you that fear does not have to make your decisions. Again, this does not prove that an angel is literally arranging these events around you, but spiritually, you can allow those moments to become reminders that fear should not automatically control your life. Courage does not mean that you know everything will work out. Courage means that you are willing to move forward, even when you do not know exactly what will happen. There are doors you will never walk through if you wait until you feel completely fearless. Sometimes you have to take the step while your hands are still shaking. Sometimes faith begins where certainty ends. And perhaps the message you need most is not, everything will be easy. Perhaps it is simply, you can face what comes next. The fifth sign is you suddenly feel an intense desire for a new beginning. There comes a point when something inside you becomes tired of repeating the same cycle. You become tired of the same excuses, the same habits, the same distractions, the same relationships that constantly drain you, and the same version of yourself that you have been carrying for years. You may suddenly feel that it is time to rebuild your life. Time to become disciplined, time to pray again, time to forgive, time to learn something new, time to stop chasing people who do not value you. Time to stop explaining yourself to everyone. Time to stop allowing your past to dictate your future. This desire for renewal can be powerful, particularly after a difficult season. Many people interpret such moments spiritually because they feel as though something inside them has awakened. But you do not have to prove that an angel caused the feeling for it to become meaningful. What matters is what you do with it. If the desire for a new beginning leads you toward healthier choices, humility, responsibility, and growth, then take it seriously. Do not wait for a perfect sign, begin with one decision. Clean up one part of your life, repair one relationship, establish one healthy habit, spend more time in prayer. Sometimes transformation does not arrive as one dramatic event. It begins with a quiet decision that says, I refuse to remain the person I was yesterday. The sixth sign is your intuition becomes stronger, but at the same time you become more discerning. This is one of the most important distinctions in the entire message because spiritual awareness without discernment can become dangerous. Not every strong feeling is intuition. Anxiety can feel like intuition. Fear can feel like a warning. Desire can disguise itself as destiny. Anger can convince you that you have received a spiritual instruction when you have actually received an emotional reaction. That is why genuine spiritual maturity requires you to slow down and test what you are experiencing. Ask yourself whether the thought is producing wisdom or panic. Ask whether it encourages patience or impulsiveness. Ask whether it makes you more humble or makes you believe that you are superior to everyone around you. Ask whether it encourages love and truth or resentment and revenge. If you believe something is a message from God, you do not need to be afraid of examining it. Truth does not collapse under examination. In fact, careful discernment protects your faith from manipulation and protects your mind from becoming trapped in every strange thought or coincidence. If you feel spiritually sensitive right now, become more grounded, not less. Pray. Read scripture, reflect, seek trustworthy counsel, pay attention to reality, and remember that wisdom often speaks quietly. The seventh sign is you repeatedly notice symbols or imagery that have spiritual meaning for you. Perhaps you begin seeing angel imagery everywhere. Maybe the color blue repeatedly catches your attention. Perhaps you notice white feathers, wings, light, birds, or other symbols that remind you of something spiritual. Maybe you repeatedly encounter the name Gabriel in places where you did not expect to see it. When this happens, it can feel deeply personal, especially if the symbol appears during a period of prayer or uncertainty. But this is another place where balance is essential. A symbol does not automatically prove that an angel has appeared. Human beings naturally notice things that have emotional significance, and once something becomes important to you, your attention becomes more sensitive to it. Yet that does not mean the experience has no spiritual value. A symbol can become a reminder. It can remind you to pray. It can remind you to slow down. It can remind you that you are searching for wisdom rather than simply searching for excitement. Instead of asking, "What does this symbol predict about my future?" ask, "What does this symbol awaken in me right now?" If seeing something reminds you to become more peaceful, more faithful, more compassionate, and more courageous, then let it serve that purpose without becoming obsessed with decoding every detail. The eighth sign is an unexpected person enters your life and says something that speaks directly to your situation. This can be one of the most emotionally powerful experiences. You may be struggling privately with a question, and then someone you barely know says something that seems to address exactly what you have been thinking about. Perhaps an old friend suddenly calls after years of silence. Perhaps a stranger starts a conversation that leaves you thinking for the rest of the day. Perhaps a family member says something simple but profound at exactly the moment you needed to hear it. You may walk away thinking, how did that person know? Sometimes these encounters are simply the result of human connection and timing. Other times, people may interpret them through the language of divine providence or spiritual guidance, but regardless of how you explain the encounter, pay attention to what the message produces in you. Does it make you wiser? Does it encourage you to act responsibly? Does it lead you toward peace and truth? Or does it encourage paranoia, superiority, fear, or impulsive decisions? Not everyone who says something meaningful is an angelic messenger, and not every unexpected person is part of a supernatural plan. But sometimes ordinary people become the means through which we hear something we desperately needed to hear. That possibility alone should make us more respectful of the people we encounter. The ninth sign is you begin feeling called to become a messenger of hope for other people. This may be the deepest sign of all because it changes the question completely. Instead of constantly asking, "What message is Gabriel sending me?" you begin asking, "What message am I carrying into the lives of other people?" You notice someone who is struggling and choose to encourage them. You become more patient with someone who is difficult. You share something you learned through your own failures. You pray for someone who has lost hope. You speak a word of encouragement to someone who feels invisible. You stop thinking only about what you're receiving and start thinking about what you can give. That is where spiritual growth becomes practical. A messenger does not simply receive information. A messenger carries something meaningful forward. If your spiritual experiences are making you more compassionate, more courageous, more honest, more patient, and more willing to serve others, then something valuable is happening within you. Perhaps the greatest message is not about your special status. Perhaps it is about your responsibility. Maybe you are not being called to become someone who constantly looks for signs. Maybe you are being called to become someone whose life itself becomes a sign of hope. And this is where I want you to pause for a moment, because there is a trap that can appear whenever people become interested in spiritual signs. The trap is believing that being chosen means being superior. It does not. If you believe that God has given you a purpose, that purpose should make you more humble, not more arrogant. If you believe that angels are guiding you, that belief should encourage you to become more responsible with your choices, not less responsible. If you believe you have received a spiritual message, the first question should not be, "How special does this make me?" It should be, "How can I respond wisely?" Spirituality becomes dangerous when every coincidence becomes evidence that you are secretly more important than everyone else. But genuine spiritual maturity does the opposite. It reminds you that whatever gifts, opportunities, insights, or experiences you have received should be used with humility. You do not need to convince everyone that you are chosen. You do not need to announce every sign you think you have received. You do not need to prove your spiritual experiences to strangers. Sometimes the most powerful transformation happens quietly between you and God, where there is no audience and no applause. Think about Gabriel's appearances in Scripture. The messages are not presented merely as entertainment or mysterious experiences. They are connected with understanding, responsibility, obedience, and events of enormous significance. Gabriel's message to Mary was not simply a fascinating spiritual moment. It was connected with a responsibility that would profoundly change her life. That is an important lesson for anyone who believes they are receiving divine guidance. A message is not the destination. It is an invitation to respond. If you receive encouragement to forgive, then forgiveness requires action. If you feel called to communicate, then communication requires courage. If you believe you have been given clarity, then clarity requires a decision. If you sense that you need a new beginning, then a new beginning requires you to release something old. The value of guidance is ultimately revealed by what it produces in your life. So, chosen one, if lately you have been experiencing unusual patterns, repeated messages, unexpected conversations, sudden clarity, or an overwhelming desire to change direction, do not immediately become afraid and do not become obsessed with trying to decode every little thing. Instead, become still, take a breath, pray. Ask God for wisdom rather than simply asking for signs. Ask for discernment rather than excitement. Ask for the ability to recognize truth without being controlled by fear. And then look at the fruit. Is this experience making you more loving, more disciplined, more honest, more courageous, more patient, more willing to forgive, more committed to doing what is right? Those questions may tell you far more than any mysterious coincidence ever could, and perhaps there is another message here that you have not considered. Maybe you have been asking God to send Gabriel because you want someone else to tell you what to do. You want certainty. You want a guaranteed answer. You want to know exactly who will stay, who will leave, what opportunity will succeed, when your breakthrough will happen, and what your future will look like. But sometimes faith does not work that way. Sometimes you are given enough light for the next step, not the entire journey. You may not know what will happen 6 months from now. You may not know who will still be beside you a year from now. You may not know exactly how your dream will unfold, but you can still choose integrity today. You can still pray today. You can still forgive today. You can still forgive today. You can still take one courageous step today. And sometimes that is what guidance looks like, not receiving a complete map, but receiving enough courage to walk forward. So let this be the message you carry with you. If you believe Gabriel's symbolism speaks to your life, do not become someone who spends every day searching the world for hidden codes. Become someone who listens deeply, thinks carefully, prays sincerely, and acts wisely. Let signs point you toward God rather than replacing God. Let spiritual experiences deepen your character rather than inflate your ego. Let unexpected messages encourage reflection rather than fear. And when you receive something meaningful, ask yourself how you can turn that meaning into action. Because the real evidence of spiritual growth is not how many signs you can identify. It is the person you become afterward. If you have been waiting for a message, perhaps your prayer can be simple. God, if there is something I need to know, help me recognize it. If there is something I need to change, give me courage. If there is something I need to say, give me wisdom. If there is something I need to release, give me strength. Protect me from deception, protect me from fear, and teach me to distinguish truth from imagination. Help me to walk with humility, discernment, and faith. And if you place a message of hope in my heart, help me carry that message to someone who needs it. And now, before you leave, remember the 9 signs. You may encounter the same meaningful message repeatedly. You may feel called to communicate something important. You may experience sudden clarity after confusion. You may repeatedly encounter reminders to choose courage. You may develop a powerful desire for a new beginning. Your intuition may become stronger while your discernment becomes deeper. Symbols may begin carrying personal spiritual meaning. Unexpected people may say words that speak directly to your situation. And finally, you may feel a growing desire to become a messenger of hope yourself. None of these experiences should automatically be treated as supernatural proof, but each one can become an opportunity for prayer, reflection, wisdom, and transformation. Chosen one, perhaps the greatest sign will not appear in the sky. Perhaps it will appear in the person you become. The person who once lived in fear begins walking with courage. The person who once remained silent begins speaking with wisdom. The person who once carried resentment begins learning forgiveness. The person who once waited for someone else to save them begins taking responsibility for their own life. The person who once searched endlessly for signs begins developing discernment. And the person who once wondered whether they had a purpose begins living every day with intention. That transformation is far more powerful than any coincidence. So keep your heart open, but keep your mind grounded. Keep your faith strong, but keep your discernment active. Pray for guidance, but do not be afraid to think. And if you believe Gabriel's message is one of communication, revelation, and purpose, then perhaps the question is no longer, is Gabriel trying to communicate with me? Perhaps the question is, am I willing to become quiet enough to recognize wisdom, courageous enough to follow it, and humble enough to use it for good? If this message spoke to something inside you, take a moment after this video to sit quietly and reflect. You do not need to force a sign. You do not need to chase a coincidence. You do not need to prove anything to anyone. Simply ask God for wisdom, ask for discernment, and ask for the strength to follow the path that produces truth, love, courage, and peace. And if you feel that you have entered a new season of your life, remember this: you do not have to understand the entire journey before you begin walking. Sometimes the next step is enough. Sometimes the message is simply, do not be afraid. Sometimes the answer is simply, begin again. And sometimes the greatest sign that you are moving in the right direction is not that everything suddenly becomes easy, but that you become stronger, wiser, calmer, and more faithful while walking through it. So go forward with humility. Go forward with discernment. Go forward with courage. And if you believe God is calling you towards something greater, do not spend your entire life waiting for a spectacular confirmation. Take the next wise step. Speak when you need to speak. Be silent when silence is wiser. Forgive when forgiveness is possible. Walk away when something continually destroys your peace. Help someone who is struggling. Work on yourself when nobody is watching. Pray when you feel uncertain. And remember that sometimes the most powerful message heaven can give a person is not a prediction about tomorrow, but the courage to live faithfully today. And if you want to declare your intention, write in the comments, I am ready to listen, discern, and follow God's guidance. Let those words be more than a comment. Let them become a commitment. Listen carefully, discern wisely, walk humbly. And when you receive a message of hope, become brave enough to carry it forward.